Now we can go and turn our attention to the preaching of God's word that we just heard from what was read in John chapter 11. John chapter 11, we heard the story about Jesus who hears that one of his friends is sick. And then he goes to see him, and by the time he gets there, he's dead. And we see Jesus interacting with this family in the midst of their grief. We're looking at this text because we're in a series that we're calling Questioning Christianity. Questioning Christianity, where we're looking at some of the hard questions for the Christian faith. Last week, we had a guest speaker in, my friend, Pastor Ian McConnell, who really helped us look at the question, how can a good God allow so much suffering in the world? How can a good God allow so much suffering in the world? And he gave us kind of this big picture view of how God is in control of all things at all times. He's in control of all things at all times, even the evil things that are happening. God is in control of all things, which should fill us with hope, because that means that evil does not get the final say. Evil is not going to be the end of the story, because God is in control of all things at all times. And so he is like a conductor who, even when there are minor keys happening in the symphony, the end is always going to be a glorious crescendo. And that's kind of what Ian led us to last week, as we kind of had this big picture view. Today we're going to look at a similar question, but kind of at a different angle. John chapter 11 is a very personal and intimate and vulnerable story. This morning we're not kind of looking just at the big question, how could God allow so much suffering? We're looking at it in a more personal way. Where is God when I'm hurting? Where is God when I'm hurting? And I think this text that we heard read for us in John chapter 11 really gives us ways to begin to think about that question. It gives us a window into God's heart, and we see God's purpose in a very personal way. We walk through the story here for a minute. We meet Mary and Martha, two sisters who are hurting. Their brother Lazarus has been cut down in the prime of his life at a young age. And to lose a loved one is always sad. Whenever you care for someone and they pass on, it's always a sense of loss and heartbreak. But when that comes in a tragic way, when a person is cut down well before their time, it can even compound the sadness even more. These sisters are devastated. And not only are they devastated because they're suffering emotionally, but here's what happens. Neither of these sisters had husbands. And in the ancient world, if you did not have a man in the house to take care of you, you were going to be economically and physically at risk. The ancient Near East culture was not a culture that was very friendly towards women. And so these are women who are not only suffering the heartbreaking loss of their brother, gone well before his time, these are women who are now also at risk. They're vulnerable. How are they going to be able to provide for themselves? How are they going to be able to guard against threats that could come their way? And so where is God when things like this happen? When tragedy like this strikes, where is God when we are hurting? We can all ask that question, can't we? What causes you to ask that question? As we go through this really pandemic and global crisis of COVID-19, maybe it's the isolation that's come. We learned very quickly, didn't we, that we are not designed to have emotional health and psychological well-being in a world of social distance. We might be kept physically safe, but the emotional and psychological toll that's happening is tremendous. Where is God in the midst of such loneliness and such isolation? Where is God when we are put in situations where maybe we were furloughed in your job, or maybe you lost your job, or maybe your income was cut dramatically, and now through no fault of your own, you're in financial risk and vulnerability. Where's God? Where is God? Where is God when maybe you lost someone to this virus? Maybe you've lost a loved one. You can relate to the pain that Mary and Martha are going through. What causes you to ask the question, where is God? We can all have things that cause us to ask that question. I know for me, that's a question I've asked at various times throughout my 25-year-long battle with Crohn's disease. That's a question that my wife and I grappled with through the loss of 2 of our children through miscarriage. That's something that we've grappled with when my wife's stepdad, who was very, very close and dear to us, passed away in a tragic accident several years ago. And we had to walk through our own sense of loss and also helping our children mourn the loss of their grandfather. And I think there are few pains that are more significant than that. Where is God when things like this happen? Eli Wiesel, who was a Holocaust survivor, wrote a biography called Night. I would commend it to you, but it's certainly a book that's not for the faint of heart. It's a night. He paints the darkness of what he went through, and he really explains how, as he saw and experienced atrocity after atrocity, his faith in God gradually died out. It culminated in this moment where there was a young boy who had been accused of collaborating against the Nazis. And as a result, this child is taken and is hung. And all the prisoners are lined up and they have to watch this child die. This is what he says as he records that moment. Behind me, I heard a man asking, "Where is God now?" And I heard a voice within me answer him, "Where is he? Here he is. He is hanging here on this gallows." My faith in God died that day. Suffering can kill our faith in God. It can. And so how do we answer Mr. Wiesel? If you were there, how would you seek to talk to him about his question of where is God when I'm hurting? Where is God for you when you are hurting? Well, I think there are 2 things that we see in this story. 2 things that we see in Jesus as he interacts with this family. 2 things that can help us begin to get some handles around where is God when we are suffering. 2 things. We're going to see how God is present in our pain. God is present in our pain. And second, God is purposeful in our pain. God is present in our pain and he's purposeful in our pain. If you're asking the question, where is God when I'm hurting? Here's the first thing you need to know. Where is God? God is present in your pain. As we read this story, one of the things that John is very careful to do, he is careful to show us the emotions of Jesus. It keeps repeating throughout the story how Jesus loved this family. In verse 3, it says, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." In verse 5, it says, "Now Jesus loved Martha and Mary." Friends, we have to understand that our God is a God who feels things. Our God has emotions because Jesus said he is God, and so to see Jesus is to see the face of God. And so Jesus is here showing that God is an emotional being. Now, he's not led astray by his emotions. He's certainly not led into sin in his emotions like we can be. No, God has perfect emotions. He feels things rightly and truly. And because of this love, because of this emotion of love that he has for this family, notice what Jesus does as he hears and experiences their sense of loss. In verse 32, when Mary comes and just falls down at his feet and says, "Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died." Verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping, do you see the picture? She has just collapsed before him physically and emotionally. She is weeping and in tears. Watch how Jesus responds. It says he was deeply moved in his spirit. and greatly troubled. He said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." And then Jesus wept. Jesus wept. Where is God when we're suffering? Friends, we have a God who weeps. We have a God who's present in our pain, who feels our sorrows with us. Notice, Jesus does not judge these sisters for not having greater faith in him. He doesn't say, "Hey, what's wrong with you? You should not be crying this way. If you were more mature, you wouldn't have tears." No, he doesn't say that. He doesn't tell them to, "Hey, listen, stop grumbling. You should count your blessings. You should be too blessed to be stressed." He doesn't say that. He doesn't pull out the coffee mug with the cliche that's going to kind of make things all better. No, what does Jesus do as he feels and sees their sorrow? Jesus weeps. Jesus weeps. We have a God who weeps. And as he does this, he's not just weeping crocodile tears. He's not just conjuring something up so that he can look good in front of others. No, he is feeling this. Verse 35, it says that he is deeply troubled. The translators actually clean that language up a little bit, because in the original Greek, the word that's used there literally means he is snorting with anger. It's the picture of an animal whose nostrils are inflamed. It's the idea of sheer and complete rage. Jesus is weeping and he is angry. He's not angry at their pain. He's angry that people that he deeply loves are feeling so grieved. He is angry that things are not supposed to be this way. He is angry at the suffering that those he cares about are going through. Jesus is weeping, and he's doing so not dispassionately. He is doing so with tremendous passion and feeling. We've all experienced people comforting us who don't really get what we're going through. We're really sad, we're weeping, and people come and they're trying to make it better. And how they do, they usually say, "Oh, I know what that's like," and then they talk to you and you realize you actually have no clue what that's like. And because they don't get it, their encouragement, though well-intended, falls flat. That's not how Jesus comforts. No, Jesus feels deeply what we feel, because Jesus always gets it. He's not someone who can't understand our pain. No, Jesus can understand our pain. He is, as Hebrews 4 says, the great high priest who's able to sympathize with us. He knows what it's like to feel us. Jesus knows what it's like to feel the pain of the loss of a loved one. He lost his father at a young age. Jesus knows what it's like to feel the pain of betrayal. He was betrayed by all his friends. Jesus knows what it's like to feel lonely and isolated. He was misunderstood throughout his life. No one ever got him. Jesus knows what it's like to feel the pain of being mocked and insulted. He knows the pain of feeling violated and abused. He knows the pain of feeling physical agony. There is no suffering that we go through that Jesus can't hold our hand through and say, "I feel this with you. I know what that is like." You know, you can laugh with anyone. Tell a good joke and a complete stranger can laugh with you. You can share the joy of laughter with anyone. But weeping and crying, that's something that we only do with those who are closest to us. And there are few more intimate experiences than holding someone and crying together. When you hold someone and you just cry together, there's a connection and a bond that forms that can be formed by few other things. Friends, that's what Jesus is doing in this moment. They are weeping together. Where is God? He is present in our pain. As Isaiah 53, verse 3, the prophecy about the Messiah said, it said that this is what Jesus would be like. He would be a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. Jesus feels our suffering. And friends, he feels it on an even deeper level than we do. Jesus is raging against what these people are going through because he not only sees their pain, he sees the deeper spiritual cause of this pain. God did not create a world with suffering in it. God did not create a world with sadness in it. But when Adam and Eve chose to sin and rebel against God, their sin came into this world and has affected this world like a virus. And now this whole world that we live in is sick with sin. There is nothing that is not touched with the harmful effects of sin. We live in a world where things are not as they are supposed to be because sin is wreaking havoc in this broken place. Romans chapter 8 says all of creation is groaning under the curse of sin. God created this world to have winds that would blow the clouds around it and would allow rain to evenly fall across this place and cause things to grow. But the curse of sin has taken that and has made those winds become raging volcanoes and of hurricanes that can cause tremendous tsunamis that can wipe out hundreds of thousands of people in a moment. God's created our bodies in amazing ways. And yet sin has caused something like COVID-19 to come in and to stop all of our lives completely short. Friends, Jesus sees our suffering, he feels our suffering, and he understands it at a depth that we can't even comprehend because he is the one who knows how things were really supposed to be, and he sees the depth and nature of how sin has distorted this beautiful world that he had created. He is a man who knows our sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as Isaiah 53 goes on to say in verses 4 and 5, surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Friends, we have to understand, on the cross, Jesus is not just only bearing the moral guilt of our sin, he's also bearing the curse of sin itself and all of the suffering associated with it. He is carrying our sorrows with him on that cursed tree. Jesus takes it all, and it says that he is being crushed for it on that cross. Have you ever felt crushed by life? Just borne down and feeling like you are just completely overwhelmed? Friend, can I say, you might feel that way, but you actually are not experiencing true crushing. If you're alive and breathing, you have not yet experienced true crushing. Jesus was fully, totally, and completely crushed. The weight of sin and suffering was put upon him, and he was crushed by it. And so the response to Eli Wiesel, as he says, there is God hanging on the gallows. Friends, the Christian response is no, there he is hanging on the cross. There he is entering into our pain. There he is identifying with us in our suffering. There he is carrying our sorrows and being crushed under the curse of sin. We have a God who is with us in our suffering, who knows it, understands it, and feels it. Where is God? God is present in our pain. The cross of Jesus Christ shows us that God is present in our pain. The second thing it shows us is that God is also purposeful in our pain. He's present in our pain, and he's also purposeful in our pain. As Jesus sees suffering and enters into pain and is present with us, friends, he doesn't just identify with us. No, he does something for us. He doesn't just identify with us, he does something for us. How often our pain is compounded by the fact that we are helpless to do anything about it. I remember the first time one of my children got really sick. My daughter Sophie, she was about 6 months old, and she woke up in the middle of the night just throwing up, and it wasn't the typical baby spit up, like, no, there was something wrong. And I'm just holding her, and I'm feeling so sad for what she's going through, and I'm feeling so helpless, because there's nothing I can do. Friends, God is not helpless. This is like we saw last week. God is in control of all things at all times, and so God is never at a loss. God is never helpless. He's never caught by surprise. No, God is sovereign and ruling over all things. And that means many things, and one of them is that God always has a purpose. He's not helpless, he's always working. Did you notice the purpose that Jesus has in this story? I think verse 6 is one of the more surprising verses in the Bible. Because verse 5 says, Jesus loved Mary and Martha and their sister Lazarus. And so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, what would you expect him to do? It says he loved them, so when he heard that they're ill, what do you expect him to do? You expect him to go run and be with them, right? Like, if I all of a sudden collapsed up here and started having a seizure, I would expect you to run towards me, all right? I don't ask for much in this church, but if my life's in danger, could you please help me out, all right? Now, I'm not asking for much, I'm just asking for that, okay? When you love someone and care for them, you move towards their suffering. But that's not what Jesus does. It says he loved them, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. He purposefully delayed. And his deliberate delay costs Lazarus his life. Did you notice that both sisters say the same thing to Jesus when they see him? They both say the same thing. In verse 21, Martha says to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Verse 32, Mary says to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. These are sisters who had seen Jesus heal the sick. They had full confidence that had he had been here, things would have been different. But Jesus deliberately delayed. He heard their messengers. He heard their desperate cry for help, and he chose not to come. Behind their statement is an accusation. Why did you delay? Why did you cause this? Friends, something that we all have to grapple with at some point in our life is that sometimes when we cry out for God, God is not going to come. Sometimes when we cry out for God, God is not going to come. It's not just these sisters. The Apostle Paul had a thorn in his flesh. Something was causing him incredible suffering. And it says 3 times he pleaded with the Lord to have it removed. God did not come. God did not remove it. Think about Jesus himself in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he dies, as he contemplates the horror of the cross. He says, Lord, if there's any other way, remove this from me. God does not come. God does not give another way. Does God not really love these sisters? Does God not really love Paul? Does the Father not really love Jesus Christ, his Son? Friends, we have to understand that we can think that God loving us means that God will do what we think is best for ourselves. But if God is all-knowing, and if God is all-wise, shouldn't we expect God to do things that we don't understand? If God is all-knowing and all-wise and beyond our understanding, shouldn't we expect him to not always come when we want him to? As a parent, I can understand that. I deny my kids stuff they want all the time. If it was up to them, they'd be in front of a TV eating a bowl of sugar all day. But because I know more than them, I choose to deny them what they want. And not only do I deny them what they want, there are times where I will allow pain into their life. Again, you have these experiences as a first-time parent. I remember holding my daughter and allowing a doctor to give her a shot. And she screamed out in pain and looked at me with these eyes like I had completely betrayed her. It was really hard. But because I love her, I use my greater knowledge to work for her greater good. Friends, we should expect God to love us in ways that we don't understand, but are better than we could imagine. If God is all-knowing and all-wise and all-loving, then we should expect God to love us in ways that we don't understand, but are actually better than we can imagine. And that's really where this story wants to take us. Look at Jesus' interaction with Martha. Jesus says to her in verse 23, "Your brother will rise again." Martha says, "I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Martha gives kind of a very orthodox Jewish response to Jesus. Jesus is like, "Hey, don't worry, he's going to rise again." She's like, "Oh yeah, I know that will happen in that distant day in the future, in the day of the resurrection, when all people will rise again." She gives a response that would have been common for Jewish people in that time. But notice what Jesus does. He doesn't just leave her there. He doesn't just leave her with the hope of a distant future day. He says, "Hey, don't worry, I know today's hard, but there's a day coming." No, he doesn't say that. He doesn't point her to her future day. Notice what he says in verse 25. He says, "I am the resurrection and the life." See what she's doing? See what's happening? She was looking forward to some future thing that would happen. And Jesus is saying, no, that future thing that you think is going to happen, that's right in front of you right now. Right? Jesus points her away from a future time, and he points her to the person of himself. He says, "Whoever believes in me." He repeats it again in verse 26. "Whoever believes in me." And then he asks her at the end of that verse, "Do you believe this?" He wants to take her deeper. He wants to take her away from just this vague idea of a future resurrection. He wants her to know who he is. He wants her to know that he is himself the resurrection. He is himself the life. And if you believe in him, it's not just a future day you're looking forward to. No, there is life in Jesus right now. There is comfort not just in the future. There is comfort right here, right now, in the person of Jesus Christ. He asks her to believe before he even raises her brother from the dead. He didn't do the miracle and then say, "Do you believe me?" No, he asked her on the front end. Why? Because he wanted to do something greater in her life than just bringing a brother back to life. He wanted to do something far greater than just bringing her brother back to life. He wanted to give her spiritual life in himself. And notice, please, as he does this is not a consolation prize. Jesus is not offering her consolation. Jesus is offering her resurrection. Big difference. Consolation is a trade-off. You wanted something, but you end up getting something else. You know? We all have that experience, right? Where there's something you really want and you didn't get it, and then Your parent, your friend, they try to say, oh, let me give you this other thing to make you feel better. And then they try to trade off. They try to console you. Let's be honest, that thing never works out, right? The consolation prize is never as good as the grand prize, right? Like, the thing you want, that's what you wanted. And people can try to console you, and that might maybe take a little bit of the edge off, but it doesn't replace that thing that you wanted. Jesus is not offering a consolation. Jesus is offering a resurrection. She wanted death to come from life. And that's exactly what Jesus says that she is going to get. This is not a trade-off, friends. This is a complete reversal. Let me illustrate it by thinking about it this way. I had a dream one time that my wife Angie died. It was a terrible dream. I was so devastated that I had to shut down the church, and I left to join the army. And so you guys better be praying that Angie doesn't die, or else this whole thing is over. I was devastated. And when I woke up, what helped me was not getting a consolation prize. Oh, she did die, but here's a new car. No, what helped me is when I woke up and I realized that which I thought was dead is actually alive. It made my joy in Angie so much more full. You know, if you suffer the loss of something and then it comes back, you enjoy that thing even more when it comes back to life. That day was a great day for Angie. She prays that I get that dream again a lot. Friends, Jesus is offering here in himself not a consolation, not a, hey, I know that's tough, but here's something better. He says, no, this sadness, this sorrow, you're going to experience the restoration of that in such a way that it's not going to be a consolation, it's going to be a resurrection. That which is sad is going to come untrue in such a way that the loss that you suffered, you're going to experience an even greater life than before. At the end of The Lord of the Rings, in the third book, Return of the King, there's this awesome moment where Samwise, one of the hobbits, after having thrown the ring into the fires of Mordor, and you're starting to see things change, and the curse that the land had been under, starting to see it lift, he sees Gandalf, who he thought had died. And he sees Gandalf come back to life. And this is what he said to him, Gandalf, I thought you were dead. Are all sad things going to come untrue? Friends, the Christian answer is yes. Yes. In Jesus Christ, all sad things are going to come untrue. Jesus is not offering consolation. No, when he rose from the dead, he is the resurrection. He is turning back the clock. He is taking ground on every step of this world where the curse of sin has brought suffering. Jesus Christ is taking ground, and he's not going to stop until this world has been fully resurrected and we find our life in Christ. In Jesus, all sad things come untrue. All sad things come untrue. And this is why Jesus purposefully delayed. This is why Jesus purposefully delayed. In order to experience the joy of resurrection, there has to be death. These sisters wanted Jesus to heal the sick. Jesus wanted to do something far more glorious. He wanted to bring the dead back to life. That's why he says in verse 4 that this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God might be glorified through it. Do you see that? He says this is going to happen so that the Son of God might be glorified through it. And then in verse 4, he tells the sisters, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? Jesus purposefully delayed because he was being purposeful to show his glory, the glory of his resurrecting power. The glory of God is the great worth and value. That word literally means the weightiness. It's the weightiness, it's the worth and value, the treasure of who God is. That is God's glory. And so Jesus did not answer their initial request for his help. And through his inaction, their suffering got worse. But he delayed because he wanted them to know his glory. He was being purposeful. He was not being unthoughtful. He was being thoughtful and purposeful. It might have looked like he was being uncaring, but he was caring for them in a deeper way than they knew. They didn't need a sick brother to be healed. They needed to see the resurrecting power of Jesus Christ so they could worship him for the glory of who he is. Friends, Jesus wanted to give them more than they knew to ask. They didn't even know they could ask for resurrection. But that's the goodness of our God. He gives us more than we even know how to pray for. So friends, we need to know that in Jesus Christ, there's a day coming when all sad things will one day be untrue. I'm not saying that you're going to get the job you want. I'm not saying you're going to get the relationship you want. I'm not saying that that loved one is going to be raised from the dead. I'm not trying to define what that looks like. I'm holding out to you the promise of what Jesus says, that he is the resurrection and the life. He is the resurrection and the life. And in him, all sadness comes untrue. What sorrow do you carry on your heart? What sadness have you gone through? What loss have you suffered? Where has the curse of sin touched you? Jesus wants you to know that he is the resurrection and the life. And there is no sorrow, no loss, no sadness that in him, when we have a relationship with Christ, a relationship that starts now and then stretches into eternity, when we know Jesus Christ fully and truly, now we see in the mirror dimly. When we get to heaven, then we shall see him face to face. Friends, the joy of heaven is not going to be being in a place. It's going to be being with a person. It's going to be seeing the resurrection of Jesus that we can taste now. It's going to be seeing the resurrection fully then. And there's no sorrow that we can experience on earth that the King of Heaven does not heal. And those sorrows, those losses, friends, it's hard to imagine it now. But in Jesus, he's going to turn your deepest loss into your most sweet experience of him. There's no sadness that does not come untrue in Jesus Christ. He is not a consolation prize. He is the resurrection and the life. And so as we bring this to a close, when you ask, where is God? Or you have someone ask you, where is God? Friends, this is what we can know. We don't have every answer to everything, but this is what we can know truly and fully. We can know God is present in our pain. We have a God who suffers and weeps. And we can know that God is being purposeful in our pain. Death is what leads to resurrection. Jesus Christ has shown that he is the resurrection and the life. And so as we go through sadness, we can deeply grieve the loss. God validates our grief. Jesus himself grieves. We can be sad for the loss, but we can be hopeful in the purpose. Christ is bringing resurrection. Jesus Christ is going to make all sad things come untrue, because that's how he wants to show his glory. Let's bow our heads and pray.